Hi everybody, Chris from BattleGoat Studios.
And George from BattleGoat.
A lot of you have been following the development of Supreme Ruler 2030, our latest project, and many people in the community keep talking about it as either a sequel to Galactic Ruler or a sequel to Supreme Ruler Ultimate. But in many ways, Supreme Ruler 2030 is actually the sequel to Supreme Ruler 2020. This is the first time in quite some time that we are doing a modern day Supreme Ruler game. And Supreme Ruler Ultimate definitely brought that back for many people. But if we look back to the things we've done, Supreme Ruler 2020 came out in 2008, and the Global Crisis expansion came out in 2009. So it has been more than 10 years since we have launched a Supreme Ruler game set in modern day. And that was certainly one of the driving forces for us behind creating the game.
And we created, obviously, a first modern Supreme Ruler with Supreme Ruler 2010, which was released in 2005. But Supreme Ruler 2020 was really the first major new evolution, in fact, a revolution of our game engine, where we were able to do the entire world simulated. Those who remember or have bought 2010 know that it was basically set in individual pieces of the world, where you then took over. For example, you reunified Australia, or actually reunified part of Australia, then reunified all of Australia, and you moved up in those stages, and the whole world was not very well simulated. 2020 allowed us to do that all at once, so that you could actually have wars in Japan and wars in America and wars in Europe all happening simultaneously. And now with 2030, this is again our next big revolution of the game engine, where we have been able to take our technology another leap further. But we thought it would be actually very interesting to take a look back at 2020 and where we have come since.
Yeah, so this video is going to be different than some of the stuff we've done recently, and probably a longer video than what we've done for some of the stuff before, because even as we looked at the project right now and where it's come from, even we start losing track of some of the decisions that we've made over the years. So yeah, today is a dive into Supreme Ruler 2020 and discussions on where those features ended up and how it's affected the decisions we've made since then.
And one of the things, looking at 2020, I think there's two things to keep in mind. Number one is some of our players actually think 2020 was their desired version of the game, and we've made changes when we went to Ultimate. Those changes were based on progress we made in the user interface in the game in Cold War 1936, and that was taken into Ultimate. But 2020 is, to many people, their favorite version, and so that's one thing we're keeping in mind and taking a look at it and wanting to see how maybe we address that with some of the updates we've made to the engine. And the other is, I haven't actually looked at 2020 myself in quite a long time. Chris has taken a quick look at to sort of get his bearings on what some of the changes have been. For me, I actually haven't played the 2020 version in longer than I can remember. So let's take a look.
So yeah, I figure I might as well guide you through some of these things. So George, why don't you head first into tutorial for a second?
The tutorial.
And I don't think we're going to go much further than this, that this is an example of the system that we had before, where each of our tutorials were individual, essentially maps that we launched. I suppose you might as well even, start the tutorial. And we ended up with, longer load times too.
Yeah, longer load time.
Not too much different. So we had this sort of box that guided players through it, and they just went next, 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 and they had to it was very lockstep in the way it went to move on to the next thing.
Can't scroll the map.
No, and you could quit at any point.
No, you can scroll the map by panning and like moving around, but you can't click on the map to get around.
Click drag must have come in one of the later games.
Well, or else we're just locked out because we're in tutorial mode, I think.
Yeah, so I'd probably say we can quit the tutorial at this point because it has changed so much. Galactic Ruler really pushed us forward, and we've now used some of the stuff we've got there. That for all our future games, we want a tutorial that is much more instructional, guiding, giving players specific actions to take. And that has been possible partially from the objective system that was added, began I guess it began a bit with Global Crisis.
And
The
Cold War especially.
the campaigns added a few very small things. But Cold War, yeah, Cold War was when we wanted to simulate historical events. So it created the scripted event system, which also paired up with the objective system, and that was a huge move forward. Next, we should check out single player. This is one of those things I definitely noticed is we still have these options for campaign scenario. Sandbox as a title didn't exist, but if you go into campaign, which takes a second, we didn't really have campaigns. What we presented as campaigns
were the sandboxes.
Yeah,
really.
and it said campaign/sandbox. That these really had no story to them. The player was just, here you are at this point in time, and now play forward and do whatever you're going to do. So another thing that evolved was above the list of campaigns there, you've got buttons to toggle between the selection of the map and the game settings. And this, of course, goes to just UI design, that we started trying to adjust how you set up different things on the different maps. But yeah, we might as well take Global Crisis. That
I like how there's a tooltip that says avatar on your avatar. I'm not quite sure what the purpose of that particular tooltip was, but
everything had to have tooltips. We tried. So yeah, let's launch in as Germany in Global Crisis, and you're already selected.
Oh, already selected. That's the default. So let us launch the game. One of the things I noticed right away, of course, the user interface when we originally were working on 2020, the screen sizes of 1920 by 1080 was not a common size. In fact, a lot of our players were playing at 1024 by 768, and we supported the 1280 by 960 type of resolution. So really, our user interface doesn't really make full use of that 1920 space we got here. It just keeps filling it up with random bits.
Dead space. Actually, as I recall, we have that same pattern repeating off the sides of the screen. Yeah. And yeah, lower resolution players ended up with a case where the mini map and the news list they had to choose which one to see. They had a toggle button to switch between them. But at the wider resolution, you could see both your mini map and your news items. And there's definitely some elements that have remained, that we have the different departments, though how you toggle between them changed a lot. You had that radial ring for choosing which department you were in. But what the departments are, for the most part, finance. Next is...
we got, research. It started at the very start, land.
With no minister.
And then we had the production, research, finance, state.
Ops is different. Ops later got merged into state.
And defense. What's at the bottom here?
Unit command.
Unit command. Okay, interesting. The sequence has of course changed over time too.
Yeah.
But and obviously one of the things I noticed, and very quickly, the quality of every graphic element. The roads is much more basic than what we're using now. The quality of the visuals, the rails is wonky. Everything becomes super, super grainy when you zoom in. We also have the overlay, what we call it, like the fog of war overlay.
Hotkey L.
Oh, L. It's also sort of grainy and splotchy, and in fact, much more performance intensive, depending upon the machine, the type of machine you have. This is a particularly, it's a Core i7, and so it's got a little bit of horsepower, but when a lot of things were going on the map, and you definitely noticed, and in fact, even at the bottom of the screen here, you see some of those glitches as they zoom in and out. So a lot of areas where we've improved those. The quality of the the border visuals, a lot chunkier, blockier.
Even for those players who play with the map grid, if you stay over yours and Control G or G. Yeah, the map grid got completely redone during Galactic Guerrilla development to be much sharper, higher resolution, better blending to the background. Some of the facilities are actually still consistent, that an ore mine is an ore mine, but power plant facilities have been completely rebuilt.
One of the things with some of the graphics here, in fact, the original artwork that I think a lot of these models were done by Stefan, my
Yes.
And they're actually done at a much higher resolution than 2020 was ever able to show. So things like, for example, the power plants, they actually look really cool when you zoomed right in close, but you never got that opportunity here. So some of those objects, we've either edited and continued with the ore mines and so on. Others we are definitely have replaced or working on updating, things like the city graphics and certain other new facilities and so on. So there's a combination.
And while Supreme Ruler 2020 got us to 3D on-map elements, the terrain here is still entirely the satellite imagery.
Yeah, we go to the Swiss Alps, the mountains look
flat.
Look a little flat to us all of a sudden here. Yes.
So, and I believe Cold War introduced the 3D terrain in its most basic form, and since then each evolution of the game has made improvements, and especially Galactic Ruler saw a big improvement in the visuals around trees. The move to DirectX 11 got better lighting, so the unit models, the building models, as you were saying, we can zoom in closer now, we can control the pitch a bit better, and a number of those types of things.
Okay, here's my first test. Let's see if I can figure out how to turn on the filter of ownership. Okay, well there's filters here. Okay, so let's see, where's loyalty, ownership. There we go. Okay, that wasn't too hard.
Actually, if you go back into the right click, that's another. This is further down on my list. Is UI wise, you could build, create hotspots, and filter. That's it in the right click. The right click became a very powerful tool. People liked that UI. At this point, the right click menu, I think, has about a dozen different options of things the players can do. Not just filters, not just build.
Okay, now I'm wondering, how do I reset
clear your filters?
How do I clear all my filters at once?
Land department, if I remember correctly, has a sub-department for filters. The globe with the filter center.
Okay.
And that has you can turn on and off.
Everything? No.
Individually, but I think the reset turns off. No, I guess just turns off the resource overlay.
Gotta do one at a time.
I'd forgotten that 2020 didn't have a reset my filters for me option. So, and it's interesting to look at the filters that as UI, it is still a thing that we've struggled with at times, that during SR Ultimate development, it began as iconography attached to a minimap. Later in development, we changed to pull-down lists, and we got some people liked that change, some people didn't. Galactic Ruler still had the pull-down lists. Now, Supreme Ruler 2030 has again moved to some iconography, but the initial push we've done on iconography, we got recent feedback from one of our influencers on his video that he really disliked the system, and it's caused us to look at that again. And so game development and UI development is, of course, an evolutionary thing. But yeah, the controls that we have for 2030 are so much more than what Supreme Ruler 2020 was able to do.
And even with 2020, we have that iconography problem. If I turn on this list and I want to quickly turn on my ownership filter, well, I mean, I'm sort of going over tooltip. No, that's loyalty. No, that's Garrison.
No, that was ownership, wasn't it?
No, that was.
Oh no, you're right. It's the key.
So this one. So again,
key symbol.
And whereas with the right click, we did put in the words, we put in the hotkeys. So that's in fact, I'm not sure if we mention the hotkeys anymore. That probably might not be a bad idea to consider. Maybe.
I feel like it's still there. Double check that.
But one of the things we actually have always gone away from necessarily putting in the hotkeys on things, because it is it sort of pulls you away from it. It sort of tells you immersion. It sort of tells you you're in a game, and so there is a back and forth on that we sometimes do.
Hotkeys are also moddable, which means that if players start modding stuff, suddenly it's telling them a different hotkey than is actually used. That hotkeys, when they're done effectively in a video game, is something where it's built right into your language localization of the game. And it would just take the time to make that a feature would take away from something else in our game development. Yeah. Let me look at what else I had on my list. So we talked about 3D terrain for flat and featured types, the roads and rails that have evolved a lot, the border lines, the grid graphics, the appearance of the map filters, that closer zoom, improved visuals on many facility types, but lots remain consistent and recognizable. And that's another thing, is that for players who've played Supreme Ruler 2020, military facilities, research centers, fabrication facilities, while some people might encourage us to redesign everything, there is the concern that if you change too many things, then players who've become accustomed to certain things simply have to relearn everything. And we've, in recent months, looking at competitors in the industry, we've seen people trying to launch their sequels and do it in a way that effectively alienated some of their community because they changed so much of the root of their game. And I remember from a long time ago, video game history, a Sierra game, Lords of the Realm 2, had a sequel of Lords of the Realm 3 that did its mechanics in a radically different way, and it was heavily rejected by the community. And so that's one of the things that we still believe in what Supreme Ruler 20 did, of having a modern day simulation of a geopolitical world where you're dealing with commerce, economy, diplomacy, military. And for that, it did manage things very well. Yeah, after Supreme Ruler 2020's development, we sort of looked at other competitors in the market to see how right-click and left-click functions were done. Oh yeah, that was a little airdroppable anti-tank. The Weasel?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, Weasel.
Weasel. Aha, for recognizing the unit. So we ended up changing the right-click, left-click options after Supreme Ruler 2020 development. Though again, with that sense of, unit HUDs. I want to talk about unit HUDs in a moment. The necessity that you have to take existing players and help them stay with the franchise, was always a game option in the newer games to be able to switch the mouse clicks back to the legacy way of doing it. So yeah, I want to talk about unit HUDs because that's another visual thing. And I remember a lot of the work we did in developing this, that we made sure we had the multiple bars so you could see, can you bring two into the same hex? Shift to toggle.
I thought I've turned off formation move, but that must have been
that was later. We had to, it was for the longest time, shift turned on and off, toggled your current formation move setting. But when we added waypoints to the game in later years, we needed shift for waypoints. So the formation move moved to the key F. Yeah, so we had these bars, which are actually done as sort of tilted 3D objects. You can see the side of the triangle. The flag is perfectly flat, just sitting at an angle. And I had forgotten that it had the weakness that as you keep zooming out a little bit, keep going, it never changes. In later games, and Supreme Ruler 2030 has this, where we have 3 styles of unit HUD to give different degrees of information. Sort of, once you hit a certain zoom, we snap units together so you can more easily understand what you're seeing there. And the HUDs had a modifier if it was air, and used color difference between land, sea, and those types of things. So I think even the size of the flag, as you zoom out, the newer games, you can still see the flags. Yeah, and that was one of the things. Supreme Ruler 2020 really forced you to stay really close to the map.
Yeah, you have no indication where the units are. The little squares that we use that you can even set, their what the colors mean. Those are all gone.
And some of that was performance limitations. Even where the border fades away and where the line of sight fades away, we would have loved to have kept that further, but hardware requirements of the day, you just couldn't support it.
Yeah, in fact, your supply ownership, it has to fade away because, again, performance, screen frame rate, all of that would be a problem, and we can keep those going right now. Got my
a diplomatic offer from Japan.
Ooh, a diplomatic offer from Japan. Consumer goods.
And it's interesting, structurally, a message hasn't changed too much, though. the old CC box that we did these as a simulating an email system. And I remember once upon a time in our design documents for multiplayer, we wanted the ability to CC, and I don't think it ever got implemented.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it did. That's counteroffer. Are we ready to go to the diplomatic pop-up?
Sure.
Let's see what that looks like. I mean, the form has done well for us, and so obviously the same style is one we pulled into most of our games. We think it actually works quite well. We have now added more tabs. 2030 has more options for what you can do.
And some of that comes from structural changes to the engine. Is Supreme Ruler 2010, 2020, these were modern day. It wasn't until we developed a Cold War game that we had to deal with the issue of colonies. And so colonies didn't exist as a concept in Supreme Ruler 2020. They now not only exist as of Galactic Ruler, and for Supreme Ruler 2030, they become tradable assets. And so, yeah, that's definitely a difference. Plus, here, you, of course, can immediately see what does somebody else know for technologies? What does somebody else know for unit designs? I guess the inventory was probably still locked behind. You couldn't see what they had for units, the last one. Yeah, until you actually had the right military treaties. But that's again something that we've expanded on a lot with Galactic Ruler in 2030, is that we now prefer a diplomatic system where some of this information is a little more controlled. And I don't necessarily know how much petroleum you are short or surplus on any given day, unless you and I sign a treaty about product knowledge or other stuff like that. Another thing with the map is the espionage has... no, let's try that again.
Maybe we just skip espionage and not talk about it?
So espionage in Supreme Ruler 2020 is actually very similar to what we've got in Supreme Ruler 2030, although a new mission is being added now to be able to do counter-espionage. Where this worked well in terms of reconnaissance could let you look into another country, espionage could try and steal tech and designs, and sabotage could mess with somebody else's economy. You could only sort of project. You couldn't really defend. That was definitely a limitation of this. Is you could try and use, in fact, it had a bit of a kludge that spies could be spotted by high, like strong recon units. Anti-submarine warfare planes might see a spy and expose them. And that was a system that I think was less than ideal. So some of the recent decisions we've had around this was to be able to add a counter intel option. So now the spies that you don't send out, you can send them in your territory, or you can send them to other, like there's a treaty to let my ally do counter intel for me in my own territory. And this will be one of those ways of doing a bit of spy versus spy, because the espionage definitely affects relationships that you can, which affecting relationships is something 2020 was very limited on. Is people are like, well, I want justification to attack another country. And because of how old this game was, our response was usually, well, you need to send Rumsfeld on a mission to pretend there's WMDs over there. We didn't have the influencing other regions. It was just very limited. Things that were on our wish list for 2020 that we've since been able to achieve. One of them was a weather system. That because we were dealing modern day, it didn't seem as important. And we still don't do day night because that just wouldn't work well. But we do have the weather system that was added later on that's going to cause units fighting in muddy or snowy areas to have penalties and that sort of thing, and that the weather systems change across the world map as you're panning. If you zoom way out, you can sort of watch it go. Another thing that Supreme Ruler 2020 didn't have that was strongly requested was Dead Nation respawning. That post 2020, it was something we looked at fairly quickly. And in 2020, when you kill the nation, and that was the thing, is 2020, you could just grow and grow and grow. There was no real internal pressure that an unreasonably large country should face for being unreasonably large. The Dead Nation's added for that. We also, of course, had a limited number of regions. That's a recent addition to the BattleGoat engine, is that it was the limit that we couldn't go past 256. And now that's 1024, you said?
Yep, 1024. So every region in the world, including sub-regions, states, provinces, and so on, we're all able to simulate all of those. And we're actually actively working on cleaning up the data for those for both modern day and our 2030 simulation. So
and there's a bit of unannounced details around how internal stressors will cause rebellions within countries. There's some stuff there that we're still balancing out, because some people recognize that we have pre-shattered countries like the US and Canada and whatnot. But other places of the world, Poland, for example, I don't think starts with any different loyalties based underneath, but we are looking at a system that will allow those to exist. Even if they aren't predefined, a Free Poland movement should be able to exist at times. And that's the system that we're working on. So future videos will take that in more depth. We'd already mentioned colonies as a new thing, the scripted event system, rail transport. It has been really fun to watch the community's reaction to the addition of trains to the game. And rail transport showed up in Supreme Ruler 1936 as a function, but all it was the units moved at a slightly higher speed and couldn't shoot until they had left the rail, whereas the train system now used is much more of a mounting up. Same way that units traveling over ocean use merchant marine, land units now mount up into a train, can't shoot, move faster, but the train they're in has its own defensive properties. A unit traveling in train is much easier to kill than when it travels on the road, which of course means we have a rule of engagement to tell units, I don't want you to travel by train. And don't put my best tanks in this really vulnerable train traveling through an area being shelled by artillery.
I can see the Czechs are expecting me to invade, so I really probably should do that.
If you feel like declaring war, that's fine. And actually, some of the military aspects is where I wanted to discuss next. Because, of course, you're telling your units to move. You're selecting units and giving them move orders. But all you can do is give them one destination. Supreme Ruler 20... Oh, you should turn down your battle sounds.
Let's go back to sounds for a second.
Supreme Ruler 2020 did not have waypoints. You could only tell units to move from A to B. Now the engine supports multiple waypoints, and that's something I know that I use it a lot in battle to be able to control my lines. Another thing that didn't exist was, and here we're micromanaging, but we can turn on the AI initiative. In Supreme Ruler 2020, you could only let the AI loose. In the later games, we added systems of battle zones that exist within theaters, and you could give different priorities. Even did the hotspots? I guess hotspots did exist.
Hotspots are one of the systems that exist, though. Yeah. Internally in the engine, in particular, Supreme Ruler has made 2030 has made a lot better use of the hotspots. That's some of the work that comes from our Galactic Ruler, where we really focused on hotspots being a more effective tool for using your troops, and so that has that expansion continues into the engine itself, and there also gives modders even more ability to fine-tune them. I know we actually had some modders that did some amazing work with the hotspots and the build system in Ultimate, and now we're giving them even more tools to really focus on, for example, what types of units do you want to respond when you say you want supplies or you want attack. You don't necessarily want all your units of the recon class, for example, to respond. You might want some infantry that has a specialty of some sort, like an engineer. You can specify that in the data files that are used to support the hotspots.
You just said some transport planes that took very poor choices in paths and got blown up by Czech anti-air.
Oh, yeah, where are my airplanes here? Okay, now I gotta switch to air. Not a lot of them, I guess. Let's send in...
Thing like elastic banding.
Yes, I know. Not the most efficient use of...
Supreme Ruler 2020 did have battle groups, that you're neglecting to use the battle groups, but that is another system that has evolved. That now the BattleGoat engine for the battle groups allows assigning of leaders to battle groups. You can quickly automate individual battle groups, turning that on or off. And there's something else I was going to say about battle groups. What else did you do battle groups?
We create a battle group.
There's a battle group management screen. That's what I was going to talk about. Again, talking more UI and more pop-ups is that you here in Supreme Ruler 2020, you have to design and fill the battle groups you make. Whereas the battle group management in the newer game allows you to say, I want sort of this size of this class, make me a group, make me a group, make me a group. And then you've got groups ready to go to wherever you assign them.
Yes, and now that I've rubber banded all my planes, I probably don't want the helicopters and the fighter bombers and transports in the same group, but my only option is to now recreate the group. There I can't really manage it.
If we're going to talk AI, we can always talk helicopters. Helicopter pilots were always... not real-world helicopter pilots. I'm sure they're smart people. Helicopter pilots in our game were definitely the lowest of the low. That they could do some pretty stupid things.
There we go.
And again, just recently we did further improvements to how the helicopters move. Oh, plus the rotors. We changed our visuals to get a better rotor on our helicopters. But we've also now changed the rules for formation move. that aircraft were never allowed to formation move. Land units could, naval units could. We've made a shift for the helicopters because often players are going to use helicopters to accompany land forces. So the decision was that you should be able to get your helicopters to formation move. Small thing, but hopefully it helps players manage their battle stuff. And in terms of the zoomed out issues of your more geopolitical strategy, obviously that's one small war across the world. But if you had declared war on Russia or China or Japan or the United States from Germany, the development we did during Cold War really forced us to look at strategic weapons. And there's the entire pop-up for the strategic targeting, where you can assign strategic weapons to targeting, set yield that you want, even assigning your nuclear weapons there, and doing some of that launch stuff. We've had some users ask us about using nukes in a more controlled way and facing less penalties. I don't feel like our opinion on that has changed a whole lot.
Yeah, we do have the game option.
Nukes,
there's a game option to turn down the nuclear penalties. So
yeah,
for people
at the lobby option, they can just say, I don't want to be so penalized.
Yeah, so for people who prefer a little bit of nuke tossing, like they're Putin or somebody. Obviously, one of the things that's entirely missing is on-map notices. There's no indication on map when there's an event in any hex.
And it's interesting, we've gotten feedback, some of our beta testers, the little words that float up on the screen now telling you this unit is retreating, like explaining to the player why a unit is leaving its position. Positive feedback on that so far from the community. So, and another thing here that I'm seeing as the Czech Republic is in its final days, in a situation like this in 2020, the only way for a defender to get more units was to build them or trade them. And that's something we've tried to address a bit as well, is that there's now a world market unit trade system where if you have surplus military equipment, instead of just scrapping it for the materials, you can sell it off to the market. And you can even try and use that as a way of driving your economy, because building stuff affects your GDP per capita. So build and sell and build and sell. If my military feels big enough, I can do that as an economic driver to help my economy, and other players can use that if they're small nations who don't have the land space or the military goods available to build the stuff. It's now much simpler to buy up your military. And obviously you're not going to get the greatest hardware from the world market, and that's the system that we're still tweaking, but it already has something in it where if something stays on the market too long, the world market sees it as less interesting and slowly devalues the price. So you can catch sale prices on military units, but you have to also be careful because at a certain point, even the world market will say, look, nobody's buying this. I'm just going to scrap it and put those as military goods on the market. So there is a bit of that secondary economy that has been added to the BattleGoat engine.
Yeah, and certainly some regions might find it to be quite a profitable thing to become an arms dealer. You know, get the technologies, build the arms, and make your profit off of that. The military-industrial complex has come to Supreme Ruler 2030.
You need to check your right side of the screen. They're making it come back.
Oh, they're not for long.
So I think that brings us to the end of our deep dive back into Supreme Ruler 2020. We want to thank all you guys for watching, for checking out this video, all our other videos. We really appreciate the following that we get, that when we post a video, it definitely gets a lot of community interest.
I think the other thing too is if, especially if you've been playing our franchise since the 2020 or 2010 days, maybe comment below on some of your favorite features and some of the things you are really enjoyed the most as far as the gameplay elements and how maybe you're looking forward to seeing those in 2030 or maybe some of the new features that we're talking about, how they're going to be interesting to the way you play the game.
And so if you're ever trying to keep up to date on the things we're developing and the things we're doing, our key points are usually Twitter, Facebook, Discord, BattleGoat forums, Steam forums, YouTube channel. That gets you a good overview of everything we're up to. So you can check us out on all those places. And yeah, we hope you'll keep checking out our videos. Thanks.